There's no denying it that one of the hottest topics in tokusatsu right now is the highly anticipated yet also debated debut of the terrific tire team Bakuage Sentai BoonBoomger. Ever since the rumors describing the season broke loose, the fanbase has been in varying levels of excitement and confusion. At this point, we've received a lot of information about BoonBoomger, from the full body scans, the robo, the changer, and even a promo video and trailer showcasing our heroes in action. I know the way I'm starting this video may sound like I'm preparing you for a deep dive and or breakdown into what's going on in the BoonBoomger world, and well, in true Boom Boom fashion, I'm gonna skirt to the left and divert your expectations a bit. While I think that all the info we've gotten about this new series is a great opportunity to throw out some first impressions and make some predictions, I want to do things a little differently. It's no secret that the vehicle interpretation behind BoonBoomger's design is highly contested, while being highly unique at the same time. So what I'd like to do instead is break down our other high-octane Sentai teams and compare their automotive executions across the franchise's history. Without further ado, let's gear up and get to it. Now, like I mentioned, I want to take a look at the other series in Super Sentai that have strong elements of vehicles and similar machines in their concept and design. That being said, to qualify on this list, the team's visual and thematic concept has to have that vehicular integration. Some teams may not be based as such, but will receive vehicular robos. Those won't be included here. I want to take a look at the teams where Sentai literally makes a car into a ranger. Before we go into the teams themselves, let's talk a bit about the theme overall. Now, I think it's pretty obvious that cars are some of the easiest themes to develop a concept around. Cars are everywhere. Supercars look like fantasy cars brought to life, and the toy scene for cars is still standing strong with no signs of dying out anytime soon. Therefore, when you decide to make your team based on said vehicles, you sort of have every advantage in coming up with a solidly digestible concept, as well as a decent framework for production and marketing. So how does one pick apart the key features from the world of cars to throw them onto a Ranger team suits? Well, I usually notice that the helmet in itself contains a lot of explicit vehicular features consolidated into one piece. One thing you might see is headlights. These are sort of the equivalent of eyes for animal Sentai helmets. They quite literally are one of the frontmost facing parts of the car, and it makes sense as to why they would be included, especially if the helmet is acting as the entire image of the car itself. Not only is it a dynamic stylistic choice, but it adds a, quite literally, flashy feature onto an otherwise static piece of headwear. Grills. If headlights are like eyes, then the grill is definitely like the mouth. You can't tell me that you've never looked at a car and imagined the grill as a mouth. In fact, I think that's how most animated cars are designed anyways. The grill is always very uniquely stylized across different car models. While they may not always be prevalent in these helmets, when they are, it definitely adds a nice metallic flair to the piece. While these two features are usually exclusively on the headgear, there's one really obvious piece of the puzzle: wheels. Now, I would say this is the reason that the BoonBoomger designs are so highly contested. Wheels on a car are specifically on its side, therefore the easiest placement for wheels or tires or similar design points would be either on the sides of the helmet or perhaps on the arms and legs, anywhere where the symmetry can mimic that of an actual automobile. BoonBoomger takes that methodology and runs its tires right through it several times. The wheel is not typically thought of as the front and center piece of any car-related personification, so it was pretty jarring to see it being done here, but we'll talk more about BoonBoomger later. These are probably some of the most obvious and common details you might find on a typical vehicle-themed Sentai. Some teams will have other defining features that actually take this well-worn concept to the next level. But let's go ahead and start talking about our victorious vehicular veterans, starting out with Kosok Sentai Turboranger, or High Speed Squadron Turboranger. Turboranger is the first explicitly automobile-themed team in the franchise, and they basically set the blueprint for what their style and design convention would be like moving forward. Being an earlier Sentai season, their designs are much simpler and a bit more indicative of the time. You basically have everything I talked about earlier. Each helmet has a set of headlights sat in line with the car's grille, and actually what is probably a bumper right above their visor. They sport the iconic symbols of speed on the side of their helmets, and at the very top of their helmets they have a black space which is intended to be the car's windshield. If you look at each Ranger's specific machine, it's pretty clear that their helmet is a direct recreation and representation of these vehicles, and I think that's actually insanely clever. It's quite actually like they took each vehicle and rounded it out to be a helmet, keeping each one's defining features visible in helmet form. And of course, on their suits, they donned the T for Turbo. This design really does it all. It faithfully maintains the key defining features between both the Ranger suits and the machines, but also effectively embodies the feeling of full throttle action. Next up, we have Gekiso Sentai Carranger, or Racing Squadron Carranger. This one is pretty iconic, especially for those who grew up on Power Rangers, because while Turboranger was Sentai's first dip into a fully vehicle-themed team, the same could be said for Turbo in its respective market. These designs were pretty similar to Turboranger, to be honest. They sort of maintained the same general design convention. They had headlights at the top of their faces, and they also similarly had black spaces atop the helmet, although it had less to do with the windshields of their vehicles. What served as more of a direct connection between their vehicles and their helmets were the bumpers. This time, the bumper actually took the place of the visor, with it creating the surrounding border and the visor filling in the rest of the space. And if you look at each of their vehicles, the bumpers are almost identical. This is a pretty cool way to reinterpret what the face of the car is, and while the Turboranger suits were more simple, the Carranger suits would add more detail in the form of panel lighting and other decals. While these suits took auto evolution in another direction, their extra rangers would also introduce some neat concepts into the franchise. In this season, Signal Man made his appearance with a decked out suit of armor kind of more reminiscent of a metal hero, to be honest, but with the combined concept of a policeman and traffic signals. While his design would keep no secrets to what he was actually about, I think Signal Man's debut set the foundation for the recurring integrations of traffic safety and police in Sentai. There was also VRV Master, who, while I don't see much of his concept impacting auto designs moving forward, besides what look like seatbelts, he is a pretty cool character still and a prime example of how cool a ranger can be decked out in motocross gear. Crossing the finish line at Mach speed, we have Engine Sentai Go-Onger, translated pretty similarly in Japanese. Now, Go-Onger's design style is really interesting and kind of one of my favorites to look at. Go-Onger has two concepts mashed into one, animals and vehicles. The engines that each ranger is partnered with are designed as a combination of the two. For example, Speedor as a race car and a condor, Bus-On as a bus and a lion, Bear V as, well, a bear RV, you get the idea. So naturally, when it came to conceptualizing this team's design, they weren't just restricted to the car motif, now they could add animal elements onto it as well. On one hand, this can be seen as a challenge on its own, but on the other, it can also make things much easier, and by that I mean they could very well lean more into the animal aspect if they wanted to. Of course, the designs we would see would be inventive integrations of the two. The helmets took on more shapely forms than the standard round shape and saw mechanically styled animal embellishments, especially with the eyes as the headlights. One cool thing about Go-Onger's style is how they executed the wheels. While their helmets do have the wheels on the side, similarly to the previous two teams, they also have tires on their forearm and leg cuffs. This is pretty neat, as the round shape of the tire lends itself well to being used in this way, and the fact that the Rangers can use them in combat is pretty sick as well. Something else I thought was neat was the integration of the seatbelt and also the street markings on the arms. While Turboranger and Carranger boast concepts of high speed and racing in their names, Go-Onger's suit details actually help make you feel that momentum and that these Rangers were actually meant for racing at dangerous speeds. Something else that Go-Onger introduced was the high-octane interpretation in avian form with the go-on wings. While these two Rangers shared very similar design conventions, the tires on their limbs became fins and the wheels on the sides of the head became turbines, with jet exhaust propelling out of the vents on their helmets. This was an incredibly creative take on some sky-themed Rangers while still keeping it in line with everyone else. While being completely different methods of transportation, Go-Onger's concept maintains an incredibly strong sense of cohesion between the core team and wings and effectively puts his team in the right gear for some super speed showdowns. Now, before we start breaking down BoonBoomger as the next car-tastic Sentai, I want to highlight some teams that maybe you wouldn't have thought about including in this group, but I think deserve a spot. Let's start with Go-Go Sentai Boukenger, or Rumbling Squadron Boukenger. Now I know what you're thinking, Boukenger's theme was adventure, it's literally in the name, Bouken, but it's not like their visual concept was explorers or anything. With their themes being adventure, the suit and robo design was more so based on the vehicles that make such adventure possible. One of the easiest ways to see how this falls in line with the car concept are the headlights on top of these visors. What Boukenger introduced on their helmets were not just the headlights, but the orange signal lights as well. They didn't really serve a purpose, but it was an interestingly different addition when compared to the previous examples. They also made the mouthpiece of each helmet the grille, with different stylized grid lines for each ranger. Their shoulders, belt, arm, and leg cuffs are also stylized like grills too, although that doesn't conceptually make that much sense. If this wasn't explicit enough, they also had their logo. The Boukenger logo is two long triangles pointed towards opposite ends atop a quartered circle. Now, of course, this most notably is meant to mimic a compass, especially with one triangle being black and one triangle being red. That is a surefire sign of adventure. But when they change, they roll the bottom of the accuseller on their arm, and you not only hear the engine start up, but you see that the triangle starts to spin rapidly, and you even see numbers being displayed around it, mimicking a speedometer. While the Boukenger concept is not truly based on high speed or racing, it still has a visual design and imagery that embraces a technical and automotive style. Next up are our shiny friends from Machine Sentai Kiramager, or Machine Squadron Kiramager. This team is interesting because their team's concept functions almost similarly to Go-Onger in that the concept is a combination of two motifs, cars, and gems. In Kiramager, each ranger embodies the power of their respective machines, beings created from magical Kirame stones that take the form of crystallized motorized vehicles. The combination of motifs here isn't as laborsome as it was for Go-Onger because the task here is pretty simple. Let's take some vehicles and let's just make a lot of areas very shiny and crystally. As for the detailing of the suits themselves, well, there is a lot less correlation between them and their machines. Each suit does have some automotive theming, like the headlights, the seatbelt belts that are pretty explicitly done, and the street pattern sash that the Kirame stones drive onto before landing in their final placement on the suit. Understandably, the objective with this team was to focus more on the gemstone motif itself, with the car portion playing less of a role. I think the car motif just served as a vehicle, no pun intended, to push the concepts forward and to give the gems more complex and tangible forms than just rocks. And well, the Kirame Changer also utilizes a spinning mechanic which also serves to connect it to its automotive theming. Even though machine is literally in its name, Kiramager leans more to its magical side, while still putting a shiny spin on motorized mechanical mayhem. Coming into the station next is Resha Sentai ToQger, or Train Squadron ToQger. Even though the ToQgers aren't based on cars or traditional vehicles specifically, they still are undeniable personifications of trains in ranger form. ToQger is another season that was pretty highly contested for its designs, even though it's been pretty widely agreed upon that as a show it's pretty fantastic. For this season, there was an opportunity to utilize a new method of transportation as a core motif for the Rangers. Some previous teams would have had trains as their robos, but those are more auxiliary in nature and didn't play into the core visual design. So how would ToQger go about embodying these steaming titans? The ToQger helmets themselves would end up mirroring the likes of their respective trains, a very common practice we've seen across most of these teams. The core team's trains were a mix. Reds was a steam locomotive, blue and green were Shinkansen and bullet trains, and pink and yellow were more traditional modern trains. These helmets do a great job of consolidating this very uniquely shaped method of transportation into a helmet, much like the helmets of Turboranger do. While the typical vehicle accoutrements are not as present on these suits as they are on others, what they do instead is integrate some indicative train designs, such as the map lines on their chest and the train tracks on their visors. To be honest, I understand why they would do this, but I also understand why these designs are as contested as they are. The train tracks over the visor look rather conflicting, especially since each visor is specifically shaped for each ranger, but then the tracks slap on top all the same with the different points of each visor sticking out of the bottom. It also ends up looking a bit off balanced. While the helmet is relatively complex, the bodies of the suit feel very simplistic. It's an interesting and dynamic take. For most people it is odd at first glance, but there are those who love and embrace the silliness of the suit, especially those who have watched the show. Overall, while ToQger is pretty polarizing in terms of design, it's very adventurous as our first train-themed rangers, and I'd be curious to see how they tackle it again if they did. And now for the main event, Bakuage Sentai BoonBoomger. If these previous Sentai teams established a common style and design convention for automotive-themed rangers, BoonBoomger blows it out of the water. At an initial glance, this team of course places a heavy emphasis on wheels, as the wheel ends up being the ranger helmet. This is a very interesting choice. In my opinion, and like I previously mentioned, wheels feel more like designs belonging to limbs like arms and legs. As they aren't really the center of the vehicle, to place it as the ranger center sort of deviates from expectation. It's also kind of difficult to draw a face from this helmet. Like I mentioned before, a lot of the details from the front of the car can kind of look like a face, which is why most of these Auto Sentai compress those details onto the helmet. What the BoonBoomger helmets seem to be doing is letting the style of the tires and the rims of the wheeled helmet say something about the ranger's personality. With some of the recent photos we've seen and the trailers that have come out, it looks like we'll be getting some pretty zany rangers with expressive attitudes, so I'm sure their body language will help with emoting for different situations. The wheels are also placed on the backs and the feet, but the next interesting part comes in the style of their bodysuit. These suits, interestingly enough, are not like your typical sleek and near skin-tight suits. They seem to replicate the bodysuits of race car drivers, even with a collar and a jacket fold for the zipper. But on the chest itself is what the concept seems to be centered around: speed. The designs of the chest are the markings of a speedometer, which, when you think about it, starts to make a lot of sense, especially with the style of their changer. While most Auto Sentai will boast themes about speed and racing, I think the speedometer aspect directly correlates with their wheeled helmets. As the main deliverer of speed in a vehicle, the wheel is integral to moving these machines forward, which sort of clarifies why the wheel is such a central aspect of this design. And while there seems to be a vast range of different vehicles to be used in this season, it feels like the emphasis will be on the mechanics that propel each machine into its high velocity action. Some people dig it and some people don't, but I know we're all looking forward to seeing what these wheelie weirdos bring to the table. Throughout the years, there's been quite a few interpretations of vehicular-based Sentai. As time goes on, the need for innovation grows even more substantially, resulting in some truly creative and sometimes wacky concepts that embody these motored machines. As this is a time-tested theme, I'm excited to see what BoonBoomger has in store for us, as well as what other vehicle-based teams will see down the Sentai Speedway. Well, those are my thoughts on the conceptualization of automotive vehicles in Sentai. It's kind of hard to say which is done best, but I'd have to say that Boukenger and Go-Onger are some of my tops. What about you? Which vehicle-based Sentai do you like the best? Let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll be back next time with some more fun Toku topics to Toku talk about. See you all next time.